People who legally died for a few minutes and came back, what was it like? My mum had severe anaphylaxis a year and a half ago and she was technically dead for almost 2 hours. She doesn't remember anything, her brain even deleted some hours worth of memory from before the shock and all of her stay in ICU. My guess is that her brain wanted nothing to do with all that weird shit. I was never formally pronounced dead, but 7 years ago my friend and I got into an argument and he snapped, grabbed my throat, threw me into a door, and held me there until my heart stopped. Sometime in the gasping for air I realized what was going to happen, and between that and the pretty bad concussion made fading out easy. I actually really enjoyed the dead part. There was absolutely nothing. Just a black void. Without the sound of blood going through your ears, it was absolute silence, perfect temp, zero stress, just low ace, solitude, and relaxation. Coming back, however, sucked. Once the guy realized what he did, he dropped me, performed CPR, managed to get me back, and every part of my body hurt so bad. I suffered clinical death 3 times as a newborn. For years my parents thought it had left me with brain damage. Maybe complicated by me having dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia and dyspraxia, because you've got to catch 'em all. Oh, and turns out I would play mind games all the time and pretend to be a lot less able than I was when I thought I was alone. Unfortunately, no recollection of the times I died. My dad got stuck underwater and drowned in a local pool when he was a kid. He technically died. As of this day, he always says that doesn't remember a thing, not even passing out or the moments right before that. So he can't really say if he was scared shitless or however was feeling then. I just remember darkness, but it was peaceful. I was just thinking about how life would be for my kids if I chose to leave. I wasn't sad or panicked, it was just rational thought. Then I remember the overwhelming taste of blood in my mouth. I thought very vividly in a stern voice, okay, you have to make the choice now. If you do nothing, you will go. If you decide to stay, this is your one chance. And I felt like I stood up. Then I could hear everyone around me, but I couldn't open my eyes. It felt like I was still not completely in my body. Then I opened my eyes and the doctor said I scared everyone. So during a tilt table exam to test for dysautonomia, I was given a nitroglycerin tablet that stopped my heart for over 30 seconds. I flatlined until they were able to get the table back to horizontal. I don't have any specific memories from during the time I was dead, but the very strange part was when I came back and saw the room I was in. It was shocking to me. It's hard to describe, but when I realized where I was, I could not believe I was still there. It's like I lived some life for what felt like weeks elsewhere, and coming back to this room was a very surprising blast from the past. Like imagine waking up today and it being Christmas morning from a few weeks ago. I was that level of surprised to see that old room again after all that time, 30-ish seconds. My mum once told me about a girl she knew who had an illness and was dying from it. The girl was in the lounge watching TV and her younger sister was also in the room. Apparently the ill girl's last word were, "It's about fucking time," before dying. Her younger sister said she saw the Grim Reaper, literally death himself, take her soul. The younger sister took her hand out to him, thinking she's next, but he said to her not yet, and then he left. To this day it still make me shiver thinking about it. Reading these comments gives me a lot of comfort knowing that there's something after death. Whether it be the heaven and hell thing, or just being a spectator forever. Either way, it's all very nice to know. 2 years ago, for about 2 minutes, I saw my died grandfather and my aunt. The most strange thing is that I also saw one of my closest friend, that was alive. Or at least he was alive until the previous day. The evening of the same day, one of my other friends called me and I discovered that the friend I saw in my vision died 3 hours before me in a car accident. I came home one night to find my father beating my mother, so I grabbed him and threw him. I got like maybe 2 punches in when he tackled me and just started pounding my face. And that was when I blacked out. I seemed to be standing in this black void, and when I turned around I saw this carved wooden door. There were 2 beautiful women standing next to me in golden armor. Through the door I saw a green field, and a large Viking hall. I recognized it as Valhalla, but I was sad. I turned to one of the women and just broke down sobbing, asking for more time. I seemed to cry for just hours. Then I just faded into being awake. They told me later that I had been dead for 3 minutes. I am of Norse descent, and I've always loved my Scandinavian heritage. I've always loved the idea of Valhalla, and of the pagan gods, but I never really believed it. After that experience, I kinda believe in paganism, but it's still so weird to me. I've never heard of anyone else seeing Valhalla and coming back. I know this seems like super weird, but I have a theory on it. I believe that everyone who dies ends up with the afterlife that they have always wanted, or believed in. If you don't believe in anything, then your mind just takes you to what you hope for. I'm not saying this is fact, but it's the easiest way for everyone to explain why their death experiences are different from one another. Mine was super obscure, but it was what I hoped the afterlife might be like. I hoped that this beautiful idea of Valhalla was real, because it sounded infinitely better than nothing. Or, paganism is real for everyone Lamau. Yeah, there's people on the world XD. My dad used to be an all-rollite pilot when he was in his early 20s. He had a mechanical error and crashed in the mountains in TN. He was in a coma and ended up dying in the hospital for a few minutes. First he remembered looking at himself and the room from above. He could see everyone there, and later described the room, where people were sitting, and what the staff, who he had never seen, looked like. He remembers talking to God in a foggy tunnel, and saying he wanted to go with him to heaven. God said the decision was his, but choosing to leave meant making his friends and family suffer a great deal. God promised him that if he went back home, that he would see heaven, so he turned around and went back to his body. They revived him in the hospital and he woke up. For the next few months during recovery, they would have him take walks in the hallways. He would stop at the windows and start describing what he saw, but it wasn't the parking lots and streets, it was beautiful landscapes with brilliant lights, unlike anything on Earth. He swears to this day that he was seeing glimpses of heaven from the windows, just as God promised him. He was also able to recognize and name everything he'd seen while he was out of body. I'm not particularly religious myself, but if that shit isn't some level of something, what else is? I died after I lost a lot of blood after a cesarean. It was cold. I was very aware that I was dying up until that point. It was very cold. Like my skin wasn't cold but my body was throughout. It was also dark. I was in and also lots of bright light, yet I felt I was inside a very dark place or room. I also felt very at peace once I knew my baby was okay. I did not panic nor feel afraid, and I say that as a person who has been afraid of death from childhood. I was 14, we were coming home from a family day out when we were smoked by a flatbed truck and flipped into oncoming traffic where we were T-boned by a can. I died twice, both times I was under a lovely weeping birch tree just chilling with my brother who at the time was 8 years old. We had a really deep conversation about how I wouldn't be able to stay with Mum for very long, there was people who would need me more. The second death almost took though, I woke to hearing my name followed by a time of death, 2:22 a.m. Doctors still can't answer how I pulled through, but I'm glad I did. My brother didn't survive, he was dead at the scene, and I moved out 5 years later at the age of 19, because me and my mum were butting heads constantly and couldn't see eye to eye on anything. Now 16 years later I've rebuilt that relationship after we both did some much needed personal growth apart, still don't think I could live with her though. I've definitely found some of the people who needed me though, and ones that helped me more than they'll ever know. Everything had this strange fuzziness to it, like a faded filter that was also vibrant had been placed over everything. I'm perceiving everything visually without the use of my now irrelevant physical eyes. The darkness around me stretched in all directions but had a limited depth to it, like if I reached out, it would be shallow while my hand darts out. Suddenly, I saw still images, like a slideshow, enter from the right of my peripheral vision into frame, staying still for several seconds in front of my face, then shoot off to the left out of frame while the next one enters. They were images of a favorite video game at the time, which I later took to be symbolic of pursuing happiness and leisure. After these flashing images had run their course, a ball of pure, fuzzy light began to grow in front of me from the center of nothingness, and it expanded outward while these sharp jets of light were emanating from it. Just pure, shining light, in a sphere shape. After viewing this in a void of nothing, which there were now edges that I could perceive like the sloping sides of a tunnel, for several seconds I instantly darted back to life in my bed, mind fucked. It was a suicide attempt. I, fortunately, survived. Doctor here, just want to point out something. Might seem like nitpicking, but it's important for people's perception and understanding. Death is a complicated thing. Your heart stopping doesn't make you legally dead. Your heart can go into what we call non-perfuming rhythms, which is fancy talk for your heart isn't pumping blood. Asystole, where the heart stops completely, is one of those rhythms, but there are others. We do CPR on these patients for the most part, and they are not dead until we stop doing CPR and decide that they cannot be saved. Then we pronounce them legally dead. Someone can also be pronounced legally dead if they have no brain function, which has many complicated steps to determine. I have never seen someone be pronounced dead and make a meaningful recovery. I don't think it's really described as happening in the literature either in recent history. To clarify, this is not talking about patients who we tell the family they will likely die. TL, Dr. Heart stopping doesn't make you legally dead. People who are legally dead don't come back. My mom had open heart surgery not too long ago and was technically dead for the surgery since no blood was being pumped through her heart. She said it was almost like in the movies where she was in an all-white room and actually got to talk with her dad who passed away 20 years ago. My brother's heart stopped for several minutes and he had a very vivid experience. It happened in a university classroom. He lost consciousness, and then he woke up in a building with impossibly tall windows, like 100 or more, and it was brilliantly sunny outside. That was his first clue that he wasn't in the same place, since it was cloudy and raining in his hometown. He told me that he could smell bread baking. He strolled down the hall, which he found odd, because just a few minutes prior he was feeling very weak and sick. He looked around, and asked himself, am I in heaven? And then he said a strange apparition appeared. He said it was a swarm of thousands and thousands of points of light. The apparition spoke, and asked my brother, can you see me now? That's when my brother knew it was God. About 10 years prior to that he had a philosophical argument with a friend about the existence of God, and one of my brother's arguments was you can't even see God. So my brother, knowing he was indeed in heaven, had a long discussion with God about all sorts of earthly scientific mysteries. My brother was suddenly endowed with profound knowledge of how everything worked and why. Then God asked him, so, do you want to stay? My brother thought about it and asked if he could return to Earth, but keep all the new knowledge. God said nope, you can return, but the knowledge stays here. He thought about it and said he wanted to come back to life. He suddenly found himself in the hospital. He was trying desperately to remember some of the things that he learned while in heaven. And for a little while, he did. But after the medications, the sleep, the painkillers, he forgot it all. But he never forgot the experience. I fell down the stairs and hit my head bad enough to knock me out for almost a minute, during which my jaw locked and according to those around me, I stopped breathing. Darkness, outdoor corridor made of blue bricks and golden sunlight shining on the vines covering the walls. I saw a short deer with eyes that didn't fit a deer. 4 years later I saw that same deer in a national park in Wisconsin. Eyes were not fitting their frame and somehow I was glazed over. A type of illness according to the guy who was showing me around. I am pretty sure I'll see the blue corridor one day as well. I'm not sure if I was legally dead or not, but early 2020 I got in a really bad car wreck. Like miracle to even be alive bad. I was alert and conscious for the entire process of them cutting me out of the car, however I was very tired. I was impaled, and when they finally got me loose I started losing a lot of blood. In the helicopter I went from being alert to just barely hanging on real quick. When we arrived at the hospital I looked at the nurse who was next to my stretcher and I remember asking, "Am I at the hospital?" He said yes, and I just let go. I had been hanging on for nearly 2 hours at this point, and I knew that I was in capable hands now. So in the spirit of trust and faith I closed my eyes. To this day I have no clue how long I was out, but I remember what I experienced. The entire time I felt like I was falling. At first it was a slow drift, but it steadily sped up. And the entire time I fell I was remembering my whole life. It was like an instant replay right up until the moment that guy drove into me. And then I was falling really fast. And all I could hear was screaming. But I realized I was hearing me screaming. I finally stopped falling, there's no more screaming, and then I just hear Peachy Ging, what's your date of birth? And I open my eyes. I'm in the TICU and I'm alive. It was such a weird eerie feeling. I will never forget the face of that nurse. Edited for spelling.